Hey there everybody. In this short video I'm going to go through the process of utilizing the console for the universal audio interface. This is going to be a general overview and maybe going over a couple of tips on how to maximize the efficiency of your recording setup by utilizing the console. Understand, number one, that the console is something that must be active at all times when you are using the Apollo16. The Apollo16 is the name of the interface here in the booth, and it's you can't record without it. It is basically the back end to what would be eventually connected to our recording software, whether it's Logic or Pro Tools or Reason. The benefits of using some of the features I'm going to go through right now is you're putting some of the energy in the console itself, in the interface. You're using some of the horsepower that's available without taxing anything greater on the computer. So to start, just a couple things about the basic view. This is the common view that would be automatically loaded into the session or into your computer once you boot up. This is something that should be there automatically, but if not, you can navigate to your applications folder and launch it under console. I think it's actually called Universal Audio or UA console. Once it's loaded, the screen should look relatively close to this. In our specific setting, we typically keep the monitoring locally off. That means that when somebody's in the booth recording, we want to make sure we keep the fader positions off, like channel 1 here moving up and down. We keep it in the off position so that way we're not monitoring what's physically coming in, but rather in our DAW software we can listen to it coming in through the inputs over there. But what I want to talk about briefly are just for a couple of little features here. When we're recording, a lot of times we tend to have a pretty loud level coming into the booth, even with the proper gain input set on the workhorse. The workhorse is the device that's in the rack. It's the radial workhorse that has all of the microphone preamps. We tend to get a pretty good saturation, but sometimes the conversion into the universal audio interface tends to be a little bit hot. So I typically have the settings, the reference level set to -10 dB. You can click and adjust if you feel like you're not getting enough input signal into the computer. But I think the -10 is a pretty good setting for us, and we only have two options: -10 or +4 dB. So for our sake, we're just going to keep it at -10. The only other real big thing that I want to talk about are the inserts. The inserts are features, are plugins. Essentially, think of it as a plugin that can be used as a bit of an external processor. So before the console or before the computer actually records the sound, you can utilize the inserts inside of the console, which is using the processing power of the external interface instead of using the processing power of the computer itself. So you're able to take advantage of some of those things before we even hit the record button. So to do that, you can locate on any one of the 8 channels that we have available in the booth just by simply hitting the plus sign. And in the plus, once you hit the plus sign, a pop-up box will appear, and it'll break things down by type. By category, they'll call it. The default setting is where all things that we have available to us are selected, and you can see it in this folder here. Those are all of the various current plugins we have available. There are thousands more. This just happens to be what we have inside the licensed machine. It's also broken down by various user types: delay, dynamic control, so your compressors and those types of things, EQ, broken down by some instruments. We may not have something in every folder. As you can see, harmonic and tape is empty, mastering is empty, but we do have other things. For mastering, we can use the isotope plugin within the DAWs. So several of these you may see some limited access, but for the most part, what we could take advantage of, I would recommend at least taking a look at utilizing some of the dynamic control. So that way you can maximize your input gain, but not overdrive your input into the DAW and cause distortion. So to do this, you're just simply going to click on one of the 5 options, and everyone has its own unique features and sound qualities that go with it. I'm going to select the Universal Audio Legacy, the 1176 SE. So I'm going to select that. You can see automatically it will populate, the plugin will pop up on your screen, and it's now shown as an insert on your strip. From that point, just a couple quick overview points to that is there are some presets available, so if you're unsure of where to start, it's broken down by type again, and since we're doing a lot of vocal stuff, we can go to major vocal limiting. That looks like a vocal option. There's also a gentle vocal compressor. So I'm going to select vocal compressor, and you should see maybe some settings change down here. Once it's been selected, I'm going to select it. And once it's there, and see, I don't know if I saw a big difference. Oh, it did change, okay. So there's a vocal compressor setting there, and I'm just going to exit out of that by hitting the X. And it is there, it's ready to go. So now the microphone, as it's plugged into input number 1 on the interface, we should see some of that signal be affected, and you'll see some of the compressor functions, whether it's the VU meter, those will start to become active. As you're going through this, you can now start making adjustments to the input threshold, the output, the attack time, how fast you want it to begin compressing, how fast you want it to stop, or how fast you want it to release. And then your ratio, by default, that setting is set to a 4:1 ratio. So nice and strong, but not overly limiting to where it's going to be a monotone input dynamic. And then here's your gain reduction meter. So we can now, what we want to make sure though, by default also is the insert up here is by default set to only affect our monitor in the room, what we're listening to in real time right here on the right side, which is insert effects. We want to make sure that if we want to record that effect, we select this little blue button, which will now add this Uad Record Enable button. The light will turn on. So now that basically means that not only are we able to monitor that channel, but we're able to record it in the same fashion. So you can add that to several channels. I can go to the next channel, go to my dynamic control, insert the same thing. And make sure that one's turned on, and so forth. I can build my channel. So if I was doing the podcast setup, I would want to go in and maybe set a dynamic control to all of these, and maybe change them all to some type of vocal compressor, or maybe a limiter of some type. There's a major vocal limiter there, and just start to mess with the different functions and features that are available within those compressors. If you want to get rid of a specific plugin or insert, simply right-click on it and hit remove. We'll add another one back in there. Let's go back to dynamic control. And we're going to use the Teletronics Legacy compressor this time, and you can see there's a slightly different user interface. So with that being said, you can select on any of them and watch them in real time. They're assigned by the title of the console label. So in this case, analog 1 is associated with channel 1. So as you're working on your podcast, you can go back and you can make some small adjustments. Also at the same time, don't be afraid to go into your microphone preamps and adjust your gain or your trim levels to maximize the input before it gets into the console. The last thing to this is our monitor section here on the right-hand side. Understand that we have several outputs. There's 16 total outputs on console. And by default, or not default, but our typical setting, we have line 1 and 2 outputting and line 9 and 10 outputting to the various locations, whether it be in the control room or the camera audio. So just a couple things to think about. If you have any questions, be sure to ask.